Yes. All right. So
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a song I wanted to share, and the reason I want to share it is because it makes me think of our church, and specifically when I found out you were teaching, Sarah, then I felt even more strongly that it was like appropriate to share. I know I'm driving, but I usually sing and drive anyway, so I think it's okay.
Yes, let's go for it.
I'm only going to sing a chorus and the bridge, which I think is the most apropos. And I think I don't have to explain why it makes me think of our church. Okay.
It's not Jesus Take the Wheel, is it?
It's definitely not that song. In fact, I would have to look it up. I think the artist is called Maya Sharp. And I think the song is called Underneath. But it goes like this. It goes, this is the chorus and the bridge. How much gold can you find if you never go mining? The wine gets better if you let it breathe. Oh, the deeper the digging, the sweeter the finding. I want to know what's underneath. Oh, I want to know what's underneath. Underneath what's shown beneath the shallow waters, to uncharted, undiscovered, unknown. That's all.
Wow, thank you, Tally. That was beautiful. And Meadow came over to listen. She really liked it. Did you like that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Was it beautiful?
Yeah.
She scooted right over to see what was going on, and then she clapped at the end. Okay, so today I wanted to start off looking at the Torah portion for this week, which is Exodus 25. So if you have a Bible or access to the text in some way, and you want to take a look with me, I'm going to read a little bit of the Torah portion. So Exodus 25. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to take an offering for me. You are to take my offering from everyone who is willing to give. This is the offering you are to receive from them: gold, silver, and bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, fine linen and goat hair, ram skins dyed red and manatee skins, acacia wood, oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil and for the fragrant incense, and onyx along with other gemstones for mounting on the ephod and breastpiece. They are to make a sanctuary for me so that I may dwell among them. You must make it according to all that I show you, the pattern of the tabernacle as well as the pattern of all its furnishings. They are to make an ark of acacia wood, 45 inches long, 27 inches wide, and 27 inches high. Overlay it with pure gold, overlay it both inside and out. Also make a gold molding all around it. Cast 4 gold rings for it and place them on its 4 feet, 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on the other side. Make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Insert the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark in order to carry the ark with them. The poles are to remain in the rings of the ark. They must not be removed from it. Put the tablets of the testimony that I will give you into the ark. Make a mercy seat of pure gold, 45 inches long and 27 inches wide. Make 2 cherubim of gold. Make them of hammered work at the 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at one end and 1 cherub at the other end. At its 2 ends, make the cherubim of one piece with the mercy seat. The cherubim are to have wings spread out above, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and are to face one another. The faces of the cherubim should be toward the mercy seat. Set the mercy seat on top of the ark and put the testimony that I will give you into the ark. I will meet with you there above the mercy seat between the 2 cherubim that are over the ark of the testimony. I will speak with you from there about all that I command you regarding the Israelites. So that's the beginning of the Torah portion. The Torah portion continues through Exodus 27, verse 19. So if you are looking at a text, or just take a minute either to reread or re-look over the part we just read, and just kind of skim over the rest of chapter 25, 26, and 27, and you can kind of get a gist of where this Torah portion, what it covers. So I just want to give a minute for everybody to kind of look at that on their own between chapter 25 to 27. Notice anything that jumps out at you, and then we'll kind of share what we find. Did anybody find anything that they stood out to them, either while I was reading or by skimming through briefly on your own? Or maybe you read the Torah portion this week in advance and had something that you wanted to share. What did you notice? Do any questions pop up in your mind?
The thing that I always love at the beginning of this that I never noticed early on in my faith journey is that, you know, the tabernacle is made with things that people want to contribute. And that it was, you know, it says that they're willing to do, that it wasn't a demand. There's so many commands in the text of like that don't give us like a choice about whether or not we participate in them. If we adhere to God, then we're expected to. But this whole thing is built literally around choice, and that, yeah, I find that to be such an interesting thing.
Yeah, that really jumped out to me this week when I was reading it too. You are to take my offering from everyone who is willing to give.
Thing that jumps out at me is that this tabernacle is portable. So it's not like some big shrine or some temple as other gods in neighboring cultures had. It was completely portable, and it moved with the Israelites as they moved.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful concept to think of, the presence of God moving along with them. Any other thoughts?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What's a mercy seat?
So a mercy seat, it actually, like, I looked into it briefly this week because I was curious as well. And apparently that word comes from Martin Luther's translation of the Bible. It's not like a literal translation of the name that describes the place on the tabernacle where the golden angels touched, but the Hebrew word is kaperet, and it's likely derived from kafar, meaning cover, which it was a solid gold cover that was over the Ark of the Covenant. So interesting, that word kafar, cover, also means to purge, make atonement, or make reconciliation. So it's basically just the cover.
So it's not someplace where anybody sits.
well, the presence of God kind of rests. I don't know where Martin Luther, I didn't research into where he got the term mercy seat, but it makes me think
Okay.
about God's presence resting, and the ark preparing a place for God to dwell among his people. So that's what I think of when I think of seat.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense to me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It seemed like it was rather small to me. That was the thing I noticed about it.
Yeah. I'm reading from the Holman Christian Standard, and I kind of thought the same thing when it was talking about the measurements. It had already like translated the measurements, and I kind of pictured it as being bigger myself.
I like when you said that the Israelites could bring it with them, God with them. And so I think we can understand that for today, that we
Yeah,
can bring God with us where we go, wherever we go.
yeah. Exactly, Janet. Thank you. So one thing, as I was looking into this and seeing what other people pulled out of this Torah portion, so this, I can't credit myself for noticing it, but I thought it was really cool that these are instructions that the Lord speaks to Moses. That's what it says. The Lord spoke to Moses. And a lot of the instructions are, you do this, or are singular, but there's a couple spots where the instructions are prefaced with they instead of you. So if you still have the text nearby or easily accessible, where do you see the word they? Or maybe it's different in your translation, and what do you see in your translation? Like, where do you see the word they? And then if you like either flip your page or scroll or whatever, look at how many times you see the word you if you scan this portion. Does anybody see the word they and where what it was talking about? I see it in two places. I see in verse 8, they are to make a sanctuary for me so that I may dwell among them. And then it goes to the you must make it according to all that I show you. And then verse 10, they are to make an ark of acacia wood, and it goes into the measurements. But if you scan past that, all the other directions for the pieces of things that are also being made, it's all you. You are to construct a table. You are to make a lampstand. You are to construct the tabernacle itself with 10 curtains. You are to make curtains. You are to make crossbows, and all these details. And so they're all singular. They're all things that can be constructed by individuals, probably the people in the community who had that talent and that ability to do that. But just as we study Torah, and Torah is to be studied in community, so the community together is supposed to build the ark, and the community together is supposed to build the sanctuary. And the ark is the sanctuary because the ark is eventually going to hold the testimony, the tablets of the covenant that God is going to give Moses. And actually, in other places in history, there are other historical documents that we see that recording a covenant on tablets and putting them in a sanctuary in the presence of a deity was actually a common practice for preserving covenants and keeping them safe. So we have a lot of instructions here about how to build the vessel that's going to keep the tablets safe so that they can act as like a sanctuary for the presence of God. And at the same time as it being a sanctuary to hold the presence of God, it's holding the covenant, it's holding the 10 commandments, it's holding the law. And even that is another way to think about sanctuary or safety, because the instructions that are on there are a means of creating safety among the people. If we think about all the things that we've learned as a community ourselves when we've studied Torah, very often this idea of safety and remember, if you were part of the discussion when Don talked about salvation and the word soterios as salvation being safety, and how we walk that out, and all the ways that we study the Torah and the stories in there, and get these guiding principles that lead to us being inspired to be creating safety and sanctuary and ultimately salvation for our community and for the people in our lives. So does anybody have any thoughts on any of that so far? So where else in the text do we possibly see a vessel? So if we think of like building this ark of the covenant, the ark to carry it as a vessel, where else do we see vessels whose ultimate purpose are to create safety or sanctuary or salvation? What other places in the text might we see something like this happening if we use our imaginations? And I use the word vessel on purpose because think broadly with vessel, like anything that could hold something that contributes to safety.
Well, there was two incidences. One is the ark that carried Moses in the Nile. The other one was the ark that carried Noah and his family to save them from the impending deluge.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. And Wade had that in the chat too, Moses' basket. Craig brings up the belly of a whale. Yeah, I didn't think about that one, Craig. That's good. So yeah, I mean, when we think of the Ark of the Covenant, an obvious connection is ark, the same word happening with Noah's ark. And then also, I think in the past, Don has mentioned that ark word is used to describe Moses' basket, as Mitch and Wade brought out. And I think that those are great things to think about, because if you think about Noah's ark, well, even Noah's ark and Moses' basket and the Ark of the Covenant discussed here, there are some common things that we see happening that they're all made, well, they're made of different materials, but all made of some form of wood/paper, because the basket mentions papyrus and Noah's ark mentions gopher wood, and the Ark of the Covenant mentions the acacia wood. So we have different types of wood that they're all being made, and they're all covered, like they talk about covering it. I think Moses' basket was covered with pitch, and Noah's ark was covered with, no, maybe Noah's ark was covered with pitch and Moses' basket was covered with tar. I'm not sure, I might be getting that wrong. And here the ark is covered with gold, but just this same concept of covering. And sometimes we can make connections across the text because we see these same patterns happening. And then we can also like say, well, what's different about these? We have Noah's ark holding people, Moses' basket holding a person, but the Ark of the Covenant is not holding people, but it's holding the testimony, and it's holding the presence of God. So one thing I've been really thinking about, like with all of these, like, David said, oh yes, let me look at the text. Yes, the Jonah idea, salvation for Nineveh. And they all floated, David said, just like in It. Wait, what's It? The movie? And they all held a promise, David said. Yeah. I love that with the promise, because I think that like there are connections of, we think about Moses' basket, that it was designed to carry this little baby to save Moses' life, but in turn, when Moses' life is saved, he's going to go on to be able to save people. And what do we see happening around Noah's Ark? Does anybody want to jump in and draw some connections with that ark and safety and sanctuary and salvation? I mean, it might just feel like you would just be stating the obvious, but to state the obvious, we saved mankind. Noah's Ark is built, Noah's family is in there, and mankind is saved. And when we think of the Ark of the Covenant, then we could think of the Torah instruction and salvation. It also carrying salvation in a different way, even though it's not carrying people and saving lives. We have the testimony, and the testimony, the text is also can also be connected to that. So yeah, sorry, I got distracted because I was kind of going on a rabbit trail in my own head. What did I want to go back to? Oh, so another thing that strikes me is that even though we can use this broad term of vessel for all of these things, they're actually quite different, from a basket to a humongous ark, boat to the ark, that the box, fancy box that holds the testimony. And it made me just playing with this idea of vessels that hold salvation and what this means for us today. And it kind of really, I just started thinking about the manger. And I really wanted to be able to make a connection that, like, because I picture the manger being made out of wood. And I told this idea to Don. I'm like, yeah, the manger, it's made out of wood too. And Jesus is in it, and salvation. And he's like, oh, the manger was probably made out of stone. And he was much more gracious. He's like, no, but it still works. It still works. And then he explained to me how it still works. But his point being that, bring up the point that each vessel is made differently, and each vessel was made for the purpose of what it was carrying out. So we don't really know exactly what the manger was made of. But I also, like, when I was looking into that section of Luke, in Luke 2, I was struck by how many times the manger is mentioned, or feeding trough, or however your translation mentions it. But it's first mentioned that Mary lays Jesus in the manger. And then when the angels go to the shepherds, they say that's what you're going to look for, the manger. It's spelled out again. And when the shepherds arrive, it's spelled out and literally said again, they found him in a manger. And there's just a lot of repetition, firmly establishing that Jesus was in this manger. And when I went back to read it, I loved the first mention of the manger in my translation said that Mary had wrapped Jesus snugly. And I just thought snugly was such a beautiful word to find in the Bible. Like, it just feels like to me such a warm and caring and safe word to picture Mary like wrapping Jesus snugly and laying him in the manger. And why did she lay him in the manger? So he would be safe, so he would be comfortable. So it was an act of care. So maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but I've enjoyed like imagining the manger as another unusual or unlikely vessel of salvation, because just like Moses's life, he would eventually lead to salvation for the people. I think Jesus' life exemplifies salvation and exemplifies safety in how he lived his life. And I just think it's funny that he'd be laid in a manger at birth, a place where animals find food, and then he would live his life in a way that he would actually feed people physically and spiritually through his teachings.
Well, you know, Sarah, I think there's one other way you can extend that. And in essence, God came to us in a human vessel.
Yeah.
Okay, in the form of Yeshua. So frail, God with us, Emmanuel. That extension
I love that.
resonates with me. So
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. I'll be thinking about that probably all this week. That's wonderful. So you want to hear the Latin connection? Craig told me on the chat not to use Latin. And then when I signed on today, he said it better not be a 5-letter word. And sure enough, I had planned to use Latin and it was a 5-letter word. So I'm really in trouble. But as part of Abby's homeschooling, we work on Latin learning the vocabulary, and her little lessons will often talk about the derivatives, and they kind of do it in a what I think is a cool image, because they call it the derivative river, because you start with a word and then it's like the derivative river, like where does the river go? So you've got this root word, but what other words like do we use now or are common to us that came from this root word? So I was really struck when we learned the Latin word for like greeting, or the Latin word for hello. Does anybody know what it is? And we already know it's 5 letters, so this could be the wordle of the discussion today.
Come on, Tana, you got this. Let's go, Tana. You got the wordle.
Not kairos. Oh, derivative. Oh, that's cool, Wade.
You got 3 chances, Lashana.
I could give you another hint that it's in a Catholic hymn that was made famous in Sister Act. Maybe that'll bring Tally into the mix here. Any guesses? So the word is salve, S-A-L-V-E. Salve, if you're pronouncing it in the ecclesiastical, the classical pronunciation would be salve, because all the V's turn into W's. But I'll use salve because that's the more common, what we're used to, and ended up being used in the liturgies. Yep, salve, David. Yep, salve Maria. Or the song I was thinking, I think is Salve Regina, but it's all about singing to Mary. So if you think of Salve, and if you're looking at the chat, you can see how it's spelled, S-A-L-V-E, and you were trying to figure out what would be the derivative river from Salve. What words do we get in our language that come from Salve? Saliva, maybe.
Salute and salutation.
Yes. And we also get the word salve. How do you say that word? The healing, like a healing balm. Salve. Did I say it right? Solve.
Yes, you said it right, Sav.
Salve. Okay. Now I'm like doubting myself as I'm saying it in front of everybody, which is spelled the same way but pronounced differently. So there's that essence of healing, but also the word salvation, which when Don began talking about salvation as healing, it just really kept my mind really churning on this idea of salve being a greeting. So where I might say hello in my day-to-day, in Latin, it would be salve, but the meaning of salve is to be well. And when I think of be well, I think of that more as like a goodbye statement, like be well, take care, farewell, or was it Polly Wolly Doodle, fairly well. I think of that as like a parting sentiment, to be well, to like just a hopeful send off that as you leave, everything's going to go well with you. But it's really hard for me to imagine like somebody coming to my house, opening the door and saying, be well, as they come into my house. And so that idea just kind of like stuck with me. Or like if I were to open the door and say, salvation, like instead of like, hello. But I mean, salvation is a broader term than we often think of in English. It includes restoration to a state of safety, soundness, health, well-being, preservation. And I just kept thinking about this idea of greeting people with salvation, greeting people with to be well. That like when I welcome somebody or greet somebody, that I could be welcoming them into a place of safety, a place of healing. I mean, literally my home could be a protection from the elements, especially in weather like this. A place to find food and water, a place to find love, companionship, care, relationship. Oh, salvage, that's a good one. That's a good connection of salve. And if we've got our bingo cards ready, get ready, because I also even though this is Latin, and I don't want to like make this confusing because Abraham did not speak Latin, but Genesis 18, Abraham and the three visitors, I could imagine that his actions to me suggest that his reactions to the visitors, his hospitality, it just makes it easy for me to imagine that his heart was saying that, like, come in here and be safe from your travels, rest, be healed, be sustained. Sorry, I meant to like kind of, in case you're not familiar with Genesis 18, I know we've talked about a lot in our community, but the idea of the three visitors visiting Abraham, and he welcomes them and gives them food and rest, and just shows ultimate hospitality. So I actually, now that I look back my notes, I had written that I know we've talked about that story a lot, but I kind of, if it's okay, I mean, it should always be okay to indulge in a little bit of actual scripture reading, right? So I'd like to read a little bit of it. In Genesis 18, then the Lord appeared to Abraham at the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the heat of the day. He looked up and he saw three men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them and bowed to the ground. Then he said, "My Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, please do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought that you may wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. I will bring a bit of bread so that you may strengthen yourselves. This is why you have passed your servant's way. Later you can continue on." "Yes," they replied, "do as you have said." So Abraham hurried into the tent and said to Sarah, "Quick, knead 3 measures of fine flour and make bread." Meanwhile, Abraham ran to the herd and got a tender, choice calf. He gave it to a young man who hurried to prepare it. Then Abraham took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set them before the men. He served them as they ate under the tree. So when I reread that in preparation, one thing that stuck out to me was him running to be able to do this, but then just all the sustaining things that he did, the water, the rest, the bread, the milk, the calf. And it just reminded me of this imagination of this idea of greeting and opening these chances to care for people. So any thoughts on that so far?
Why did he bow down to the 3 people?
I think that it was just customary, like a customary type of greeting. Like I may be off, but I imagine it as being like, well, kind of again, that like a symbol that you're safe here and I'm willing to serve you and take care of you. And I'm, as opposed to like, I'm scared or I'm going to fight you. I could be off, but that's kind of how I interpret the bowing down. Also, it says the Lord appeared to him. So in this passage, I don't remember if Don's ever dove into this aspect of it, but I also don't know, did Abraham automatically know that it was the Lord already at this point, or did he realize that later? So maybe there was some sort of holiness or something that he picked up on that made him want to bow kind of like in a worship way. Any other thoughts on Janet's question?
Yeah, one of the things I would say too that's kind of shocking to the audience reading it is that here's Abraham, who we know at this point is extraordinarily affluent and has lots of power, has lots of people in his camp, and 3 strangers who could be, there's no indication that they are of any standing. And so for him to come out and bow down to them as a sign of respect is again a demonstration of just the unbelievable hospitality that Abraham has. You know, if you walk into an extraordinarily affluent neighborhood, you're more likely to probably have a gun pulled on you or the police called on you than one of the homeowners of the largest mansion in the town come out and demonstrate respect to you and just assume that you are worthy of being invited in and cared for and created a safe space for. Instead, we would often be skeptical of why the person's there, and we would view them as a threat instead of us viewing our opportunity to offer safety to them. So I think in some ways, Sarah, you're right. This is a customary thing, but it was a customary thing of people of lower standing to do it to people of higher standing. So I think this is, again, just exemplifying, especially before we get to Genesis 19, just the sheer difference between the way Abraham and his community function versus Sodom functions.
So one thing I thought of, so in terms of Latin and etymologies, when we're talking about salve and salve and healing and be well, is, hospitality. The place of lodging, not hostile. All come from the Latin for host and guest. And so it's this idea that when you're in the hospital, it's because you're being hosted, you're being put up at a lodging in order to become well. And so hospitals, hostels, hotels are places of safety, of healing, of rest. And so
Awesome.
in some ways, Abraham his hospitality is literally providing a hotel or even a hospital to people to provide healing and safety.
That's great. Thank you, Wade.
Latin for you, Craig. Hospice.
So back to what I was saying about so I imagine it kind of like the doorway to my home, trying opening the door and saying salvation, or the entrance of Abraham's tent. So I think those are helpful images, but I want to go a little bit further with it and go back to thinking about Jesus in that manger, or as Mitch brought out, really Jesus in his bodily vessel, which is even more of a perfect way of explaining and thinking about where I was going with my thoughts, but thinking about the actual life of Jesus. And what are some examples that we see in the text of how Jesus offered safety or sanctuary or salvation in this way that we're talking about it? What are some examples that you can think of off the top of your head of Jesus showing these things in the text?
Can think of a couple of where Jesus is kind of inviting people to touch him or into intimacy with him. I think one of the most intimate pictures in the Bible is John resting. They're all reclined around a table anyway, but John leaning back into basically Jesus's arms and resting, there on the chest of Jesus. I think of other times where people have been put on the outside and Jesus inviting them closer and indeed to touch him. So the paralytic who is being lowered by his friends through the roof, the woman who touches his robe because that's as close as she dares, is to just be in his shadow, and he says, no, come here, and basically just this whole idea, right, of people often that have been either through ritual or custom or just through social status been told, keep at a distance. The lepers, the literal lepers that he heals, and who are told, go stay outside the city, so that they don't contaminate or pollute. So I think of all of these places where, Jesus is inviting people not just closer, but into intimate contact with him, touch. And often those are healing touches. So.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that when you started with the John example, because he was literally like using his body to give somebody else rest. Like he became like a human pillow in that instance. And as opposed to other instances that are also wonderful, like, like putting somebody up in lodging or giving somebody a bed is one thing, but like literally like him, when you said that, it just made me think about how his actual body was being used for rest in that moment. And I was thinking about the friends and the paralytic, because Abby and I actually read that at bedtime last night. And I don't really know if there's anything to it, but it just struck me, the 4 friends carrying the paralytic reminded me of the 4 people carrying the ark, like carrying the ark everywhere. And like, I just pictured like, the same idea of like community carrying God's presence, and in this case, community carrying somebody to God's presence and carrying to sanctuary and healing. Just found that common denominator of the 4 people working together. And then Craig said, the little dude up in the tree, Zacchaeus. Yeah, another story of Jesus bringing somebody who was maybe like on the outskirts and offering to have a meal with them, and then also just thinking about the miracles of the feeding too, that Jesus was taking care of people's physical needs through feeding. Any other that anybody wanted to share?
I was gonna kind of touch on the same thing. It's, for a lot of people, safety and security, we talk about, food for thought exists because there's food insecurity in our city. There's housing insecurity, all these different insecurities that unfortunately we don't always think about what it means to offer someone that security. And so to offer someone food or something that they need. And so we just see Jesus constantly offering food. It's an ongoing thing with Jesus to offer food, because that's one of the more base needs that have to be met in order for people to survive. And so to lack it is to lack safety. And so, yeah. So for me, I was thinking similarly to what you just said, Sarah, just a lot of food instances.
Yeah.
Just like Abraham.
Yeah. Just as we read in the portion that the ark had handles, and we're talking about the carrying of it, so that, and Mitch brought it up, I think at the very beginning, that it's portable and it can go with them. And just as that, like Jesus healing goes with him as he goes everywhere. And this leads me to like one of the most important things that I really wanted to say today with all of this. And I feel like it could come off as kind of trite, but as I was like organizing my thoughts, I just wanted to, I guess the trite part is that I just really want to thank everybody here, like literally everybody on the call, and everybody who's a part of our community who maybe would listen to this later or just know in spirit that this is true, but just thanking everybody for being you. And on the one hand, I do mean like you as like the vous of French, right? Like the plural you, like all of us as a community. But I also mean like very personally and like very individually, because each one of you has brought healing and safety and sanctuary and in turn salvation to me and my family and to others just by how you are living your lives. Even just showing up today to this Zoom call, even when we can't be in literal proximity physically with each other, and even if you haven't said or contributed anything to the conversation vocally, but just your presence here, it suggests solidarity with the community. And it's like a little building block that builds our community every time that we show up and are present with each other. And this is an important community because this is a community that actually tries to truly be a safe place for many people to love God and to love other people. And we don't have the Ark of the Covenant nowadays, but Jesus implies that when people are gathered in his name, and this is also a rabbinic idea that when people study the Torah, that God's presence is there. And I think that when we live out the ideas of Torah, the love and the community and the justice and the hospitality, I just picture that as us carrying God's presence into the world, that we are kind of like mobile sanctuaries, that we are vessels that are bringing healing and safety, salvation wherever our lives lead us, whether it's opening the door to our home or it's going into our workplaces or the different situation that we see us in, and we can bring that safety. But I wanted to start with the gratitude because I didn't really, my heart in this discussion, although I think it could be like a go get 'em kind of like rallying cry to lead to a brainstorming session of how do we do this, it could go there. But really like the heart, as I've like thought about this message and it's kind of spun around in my mind, is that to just like try to impart so much gratitude and awe and wonder, because you individually, each one of you, and you, like all of us as a community, we are already doing this. And we have done it and we're doing it and we will be doing it in the future. So I just feel a lot of gratitude for like everything that each of you have been individually in your worlds as I've gotten to know you. Awe for like where you are right now and what you're doing now, and wonder and hope about how God is going to continue to guide you to bring his presence into the world in different ways. Because when we talk about all those different vessels, I was pointing out early on, as Don had pointed out, that all the vessels are different and we're all different, but all the vessels were perfect for the job that they were intended to do. And the vessels that God has given us are exactly enough to bring safety, healing, love, and sanctuary into the various places that we find ourselves. Physical places, relationships, even on that level, like bringing safety into that as well. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to grow and change or that we get everything right all the time. We are still going to make mistakes and we're going to miss opportunities. And as you probably figured out, I always think reflecting on those areas of where we need to grow to create safety, that is an integral part of growth. And reflecting on the areas we need to grow is actually a part of creating safety. So every time we stop and think about how might I have shown safety or salvation or healing in a different way, maybe in a particular scenario, even if I'm just doing that work in the present, that is something to celebrate because that is creating safety, because it's that reflection and that growth towards how I can continue to be a safe space or grow to be a better safe space in the future. And so even when we're not getting it 100% correct or perfect, there's so much to celebrate right now, and there's so much hope for what might come as we continue to grow in this area and this conversation. So what are some ways, I wanted to ask, that you create safety or healing or sanctuary or salvation in your own world, your day-to-day experiences? Because when we share our experiences in our world, to me, it's like a chance to water the soil of everybody else. It's not really meant to be like a humble brag or like anything like that. But if we don't share these ideas or this inspiration, then we miss out on that. And it kind of goes back to the last time I spoke, and I was talking about the examine, about sharing when we felt close to God. But God is using us in everyday, big and little ways to make his presence known into the world. And when we share those things, it can be inspiration. And for all of us, we can all feel closer to God, and we can all feel encouraged by that. So if you feel comfortable, and if you can think of any ways that you personally, or maybe that you've seen somebody in the community create safety or healing, I just wanted to open the floor and see if anybody would be willing to share on that. How can we create safety, sanctuary, and salvation in our day-to-day lives?
By making yourself available.
By making yourself available. Yeah, that's a good one. One thing I think of, like, because as I took like the image of, okay, opening the door and greeting somebody, salvation, but what if I'm on the move? And then I just started to imagine I was like in one of those sumo bubbles, like, I don't know, those big plastic bubbles was like around me. So like, this is my bubble. And if somebody's going to enter my bubble, how, when they enter my bubble, are they going to feel safety? And that was one just playful thing in my head that I was thinking about. And I think one of the very simple things is eye contact as well. Like, just looking in somebody's eyes can be really powerful, that they are seen, and that you're really also just listening well to what they have to say.
You know, one thing we emphasize downtown, and I think this is really important, and it's kind of a minor thing, kind of like what you were mentioning earlier, Sarah, is talking to people and calling them by their given name.
Yes, the name.
I mean, it's just unbelievable, because there's so many people who are not called by their given name. God gave us a name. God gave us the command to name things. And there's a lot of power in just simply calling an individual by their name. It always amazes me how people respond to that. It's just remembering a person's name. Okay, so they're no longer the stranger. They're no longer the other. That just calling them by name invites them into community.
Yes, I love that.
I want to say one of the places that I've seen it in our community, and I would imagine that the person doesn't even realize it, is that every time when we were meeting in person, that Janet would bring baked goods. And let me say why that strikes me. Because that meant that whether she had to pick stuff up at the store to make it, or she had to set time aside during the week to make it, that it wasn't just the food arriving that day. It wasn't culminated in just that second. There was time and there was preparation, all of it with us on her mind, wanting to be kind to us. And so every week when Janet would show up with baked goods, and Janet, I hope you know, I truly felt this every time. Like, I was blown away that you would set aside time in your week to do that for us. And so that's one of the ways. And I think it goes to kind of the point of all this, is that sometimes I think we feel that we have to have some grandiose way of showing that. And in reality, it's, true hospitality is felt in the small pieces. Like, it's easier to almost be grandiose in offering something to someone, but it's in the small inconsistency and individual little pieces. So that's one of the ways I saw someone in our community demonstrate it. So Janet, thank you for doing that. Plus, I also really love your baked goods. So
I just want to add on to that and say that not only does she make baked goods, but she would always be looking for gluten-free recipes because of me. So that is amazing. Something I never expected anybody to do. And it was just such a sweet and thoughtful thing. So.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on something that Dawn said, because I think this is really important. And this really struck on me recently when I was reading in the Gospel of Mark. It says in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verse 41, it says, "Truly I tell you, anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to the Messiah will certainly not lose their reward." And something as simple as giving a cup of water is recognized for its important. And, so like handing out a bottle of water literally fulfills that commandment. It's amazing. We always look for grandiose, huge, big things to do, but something as simple as giving a cup of water, obviously it drew Jesus's attention. And so we shouldn't overlook these small acts and what kind of a profound impact they may have.
Yeah. And I think of in both those examples, in Tana with the gluten-free and Mitch with the water, that like those actions, it's also just another way of showing that this person is being seen and that their needs are important and valid. And and like keeping things gluten-free is like also contributing to your health, Tana. And to like, and I understand that like people with sensitivities, like I never expect anybody to cater because I know it can be a huge pain in the butt to figure out like the things that I shouldn't be eating. But when somebody does that, it's like such an amazing act of love, because it's contributing not only just to my basic need to eat, but also to like my overall health. And I think seeing somebody and like just taking that minute to meet their needs and even just like admit that their needs are important, whether through a cup of water or something.
I'd also say another way that I see someone in our community do it is Amanda is like the best gift giver. And whether it's being something playful in the way she messages me and says, I think yesterday I got a message from her saying, "I'm virtually tackle hugging you," or something. And so not just in physical gifts, but also just the randomness of reaching out and just expressing love. And again, I think this goes back to being seen and knowing that someone's thinking about me at a random time, is just a blessing. And Amanda does that very, very frequently.
Yeah, and backing up a little bit into the chat, when Amanda said sanctuary hotspots, I was totally thinking the same thing, that like this whole idea is reminding me of like when Don gave a message about being spiritual hotspots, that I don't remember anything he said other than spiritual hotspot. And I just took that to mean that like my presence with somebody can help usher them into the presence of God. And I'm totally with you on that. And also similar, Amanda shared checking in on people, work, friends, family, even just a text to let them know that they're on your mind and heart. And Tana said, I was just about to say that. Yeah, and any other examples before I start talking again? Make sure I give everybody a minute.
My wife isn't here today, but and she would be embarrassed if she heard me say this, but I believe that my wife forgives incredibly easy. I'm not an easy person to live with. I don't want to hear any amens from the group, just to let you know. But
well, everyone's muted except me, so you're okay.
But no, she does. I have not run across many individuals that forgives as easily as my wife.
That's awesome. I think just to throw some other ideas, I think like creating the safety, another way that we can create safety in groups and communities that we're in is by having clear expectations, clear communication, doing the hard work of relationship, also not being afraid to be a voice for the people who are marginalized, making sure that people are represented in conversations, making sure people are allowed to be heard in conversations, not interrupting people in conversations if we're in a group setting, and making sure that people can be included, speaking up if something is not right, having the integrity to like speak up to create safety for other people who may not be able to speak up for themselves, are all different ways that we could think about carrying safety into the world. And Don said, David starting a business and bringing folks along with it. Yeah. I think that we can carry this idea of safety into so many environments and relationships in our life as like, and I hope that this is just, my real hope like is that this is just inspirational and hopeful for us to reflect on this, the beauty of how God designed us to do this, to live in community and to share this, to celebrate how we are doing it. And Amanda, shout out to Darnell, even though he left. One morning she was asking to be let in on Zoom, but he thought I was physically there and ran downstairs to make sure I could come into the chapel as a modern Abraham. That's amazing. And what I didn't really want this to be, and just in case anybody would be going there, is that just a reminder that the ark was carried by the community. 4 people carried the ark, and God guided the ark. So I take that as a symbol that we're meant to be supported and nurtured and to work alongside community as we're trying to be these vessels of sanctuary. So this isn't really meant to be one more thing on your to-do list, or to listen in and be like, oh, I wish I was like Amanda. And I thought to randomly text people, oh, I wish I had done what Darnell did, or why didn't I do that? It's not meant to go to the guilt or the shame. I think Don and I were talking a little bit yesterday about how Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And yeah, so Craig makes bleepy baked goods. So, but yeah, so the idea that like there is a burden in this, that it's not that there's no burden. There is a burden, there is action, but Jesus suggests that the burden can be light. And for me, I feel like this most exemplifies itself when like there's a time where I've done something that's been incredibly impactful to somebody, but it seemed rather easy for me. Not that it was like, oh, like every bit of it was easier, it wasn't hard, but it was just that feeling of like it just came naturally, or I felt like I had no choice, or it was just what I had to do. And then people are extremely impacted by it. And that's what I kind of think of those moments as being like, yeah, that burden overall was light because I was operating either in my gifting, or I was operating with the support of community, or a lot of encouragement, or sometimes just a really strong belief in what I was doing can compel me. And then in those instances, the burden feels light, as opposed to kind of Mitch alluded to this of sitting on my couch and thinking of all the things I could be doing, or fear of missing out, or comparing myself to other people, or wanting to do the more dramatic or fancy thing, or start something new from scratch and put my name on it, or whatever that might look like, comparing myself, but realizing instead that I can be moving in the world and sharing God's presence, and the burden of that can be light.
You know, Sarah, one thing I love about the whole story about the ark, that contrasts so much with what the nation of Israel was expected to do in Egypt. If we remember, what they did in Egypt was make bricks. Okay, and they made bricks to build monuments to Pharaoh. So they all had the same occupation, make bricks. And they were conscripted to make bricks. Even worse, they had no choice but to make bricks. And I think a lot of us feel that way, like in our everyday jobs, that we're conscripted sometimes to make bricks. And so God releases them, however, within their own individual giftedness. And then they have a choice on how they contribute that. So as Don pointed out early in our conversation, they were not conscripted to provide for the building of the tabernacle. They gave as their heart led them to give in whatever area, and they would give in their area of talent and giftedness. So whether it would be weaving cloth or working in gold or silver or copper, what a beautiful contrast that is to what the expectations were under the oppressor in Egypt. So they could exercise their own giftedness. And when you exercise your giftedness, all of us know that when we've ever been given the opportunity to do that, you excel, you have joy in your heart. You serve because you want to serve, not because you have to serve. So I love that contrast between the two, between what God provided them in the building of the tabernacle versus what the oppressor in Egypt required the Israelites to do.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Mitch. And that just made me think too that, really couldn't God have just like zapped down his own ark to carry himself in and just like made it into being and created it, but creating that opportunity for people to express their gifts, because work is not necessarily the enemy. I mean, we're made to create, and we find a lot of joy in creating and whatever that passion that we have personally. So I love that, because I didn't think about that when I was reading through the portion about people using their individual gifts. So thank you. And the comparison to being in slavery, making the bricks, that's really impactful. And in the chat, Amanda had said, Lee is much better than I am at checking in. And Craig said, man, you guys are really making me consider my Dust Agape Gala. Well, one thing, Craig, is you always have an amazing wealth of ideas. And I think that is an amazing gift. And even when sometimes the ideas are maybe shorter lived than originally intended, or some ideas get thrown out there and don't take flight just now, just every time you contribute ideas, it just totally makes me think of like the story of like the seeds, because even if you are joking about a Dust Agape Gala, but now all of us have that seed of an idea that was never there, that came from you in our heads, and that can roll around, and maybe it'll come to fruition in a totally different way. But yeah, I just think that's awesome. That's one of the things I see. Oh, go ahead, Craig.
I was going back at it doesn't have to be a grand gesture. It could be something little. And I was just trying to play along. But now I'm thinking about it. So.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff we've focused on is like doing the things that people do. And I think one of the best ways we can be mobile sanctuaries is in how we talk to other people. And there were a few things we mentioned, like calling people by their correct name, but also just, I'm trying to think of how to express it, and I'm not quite sure how to, but there's a very big difference, talking to somebody who's like maybe impatient or rude, or even one of my favorite things is I'm in the kitchen where I belong, but I was just beating Don to the punch. One of my favorite things that like Brene Brown says is, clear is kind, so like, even are you being clear about things? So there's just so many aspects in the way that we communicate with one another that I don't know that we always think through. And it's something I try to think through, but I'm not always 100% good at executing. And actually that brings up another thing, even reducing violence in our language. There's so many idioms we use that are about war. Pull the trigger on something that has nothing to do with guns, things like that. So I just think there are so many multiple ways we can consider recognizing the Imago Dei in other people and just how we speak and communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mitch had brought up that he really enjoys the easy questions that Janet poses. But seriously, Janet asks many of the hard questions that we all think but don't ask. Yeah, and I know we've said that to you, Janet, many times, and I hope that just really rings as true, because your questions always just lead us to another level of thinking things that either we brushed over or we just never thought to stop and ask. So it's extremely valuable.
Or things that we take for granted.
Yes, yes. Well, it's almost 12 o'clock. I do really appreciate all of you, and thank you for all of the input. And yeah, I just hope that we can carry that wonder and that hope into the future of what we will see and notice as each of us walks out as best we can, the life that honors God and brings God's presence into the world, and encourage each other in that. And I just really hope that everybody can walk away today a little bit encouraged and yeah, inspired. Even though a lot of what we said today, I felt like it's all things we said before in a different way, just like kind of circling a lot of different ideas and tying a lot of things together and making, maybe it wasn't as much of here's a brand new way to think of something, but these conversations are important, even if they are restating things that we already know, because that's what we need to be for each other sometimes, is just restating what we need to know, verbalizing, thinking through these things, and being a support of a community as we all go out into the world, and of these concepts that we're trying to walk in day by day. So, and Craig says, hey, I learned Latin and French. That's right. So any last closing comments before I close in prayer? Okay. Let's pray. God, I just thank you for this discussion. I thank you for everybody who is a part of this discussion, for the unique people that you have created, for the chance to be your vessels, your sanctuaries, your mobile sanctuary hotspots, moving through the world, bringing your presence, bringing safety, bringing hope, bringing healing, meeting the needs of those around us, and resting in your great love for us. In Jesus' name, amen.